On November 13, 1942, at 1:48 in the morning, Japanese Rear Admiral Hiroaki Abe watched from the deck of the battlecruiser Hai as a pathetic silhouette approached on the horizon of the waters of Guadalcanal. It was the American destroyer USS Laffey, a Benson-class ship of only 1,630 tons, steaming directly toward his formation of 2 battlecruisers, 1 light cruiser, and 14 destroyers. The Japanese crew laughed. Some officers even pointed at the small American ship as if witnessing a voluntary suicide. The Hai alone weighed 32,000 tons, and its main turrets fired 14-inch, 356 mm, shells capable of piercing 12 inches of armor at 20 kilometers. The Laffey had 5-inch, 127 mm, guns designed for anti-aircraft defense. It was like a dog attacking a bear. But the commander of the Laffey, Lieutenant Commander William Hank, was not there to win by force. He was there to buy time. And in the next 10 minutes, that tin can would turn the naval battle of Guadalcanal into one of the most brutal and chaotic clashes of the Pacific War, proving that courage and audacity can outweigh tonnage. This is the story of how a doomed destroyer faced the elite of the Imperial Japanese Navy at such close ranges that the crews could see each other's faces, and how its crew fought until the very last second, changing the course of a battle that would decide the fate of Guadalcanal and perhaps the war itself in the Pacific. To understand what was at stake that night, we need to go back 5 months. In August 1942, American Marines landed on Guadalcanal, marking the first major Allied offensive in the Pacific. But taking the island was only half the problem. Holding it was another story entirely. The Japanese responded with what they called the Tokyo Express, nightly convoys of fast destroyers that sped down the channel between the islands, dropped off troops and supplies, shelled American positions, and disappeared before dawn, when Allied aircraft could attack them. It was an operation of military precision executed night after night. But by November 1942, the Japanese decided to change strategy. Instead of merely reinforcing their troops, they planned a massive operation to destroy the Henderson Field airfield and retake full control of the island. For this, Admiral Abe was sent with an overwhelming naval force, including the battlecruisers Hai and Kirishima. The mission was simple: sail to Guadalcanal during the night, bombard Henderson Field with thousands of large-caliber shells until it was nothing but craters, and ensure no American plane could take off in the morning. With the airfield destroyed, the Japanese could land 13,000 troops without air opposition. American Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan knew what was coming. His reconnaissance ships had detected the Japanese force sailing down the slot, the channel between the islands. But Callahan had a critical problem: there wasn't enough time to gather a balanced force. He would have to intercept the Japanese with what he had available. And what he had were 13 ships, 5 cruisers and 8 destroyers, against a Japanese force superior in tonnage, firepower, and training for night combat. The Japanese were masters of nocturnal naval battles, using superior optics and coordinated tactics. The Americans were sailing straight into an ambush. But Callahan had one card up his sleeve: suicidal audacity. He ordered his force to steam directly into the middle of the Japanese formation, turning the battle into a short-range chaos where Japanese technical superiority would be neutralized by confusion. And at the forefront of this impossible charge was the USS Laffey. The USS Laffey was built in 1942 at the Bethlehem Steel Shipyards in San Francisco. It was a Benson-class destroyer, designed for convoy escort and anti-submarine warfare, not for facing battlecruisers. Its crew of 250 men had trained intensely, but many had never seen real combat. Commander William Hank was an experienced officer, but even he knew that what he was about to do violated every tactical principle of naval warfare. Destroyers do not attack battlecruisers head-on. But that night, the rules no longer mattered. What mattered was preventing the Japanese from reaching Henderson Field. At 1:42 a.m., American radar detected the Japanese formation just 27,000 yards away, about 25 kilometers. The distance was closing fast. The 2 groups of ships were sailing directly toward each other in total darkness. A collision was imminent. At 1:48 a.m., hell began. Japanese searchlights snapped on, illuminating the American ships like targets in a shooting gallery. Seconds later, the main batteries of the Hai opened fire, its 14-inch turrets thundering in the night. Columns of water 100 feet high erupted around the American cruisers. But Callahan did not retreat. He ordered odd ships left, even ships right, a maneuver that split his force and sent it directly into the middle of the Japanese formation. It was tactical insanity, but it was the only chance for survival. The distance dropped to 3,000 yards. Then 2,000. The ships were so close they could see each other clearly. The Laffey, at the vanguard, found itself face-to-face with the Hai. The distance was just 20 yards, less than 20 meters. So close that the Hai could not lower its main guns enough to hit the destroyer. The Laffey opened fire with everything it had, its 5-inch guns firing point-blank at the battlecruiser's superstructure. The Laffey's shells could not penetrate the Hai's heavy armor, but they raked the bridge, destroyed fire control systems, and killed several officers. Admiral Abe was stunned by the blast. The Hai's conning tower was on fire, and for precious minutes, the ship was effectively uncommanded. But the Laffey was paying a brutal price. Japanese 5-inch and 5.5-inch shells from escort destroyers struck the small ship repeatedly. The bridge was destroyed. Commander Hank was killed. The engine room was pierced. Fires began to spread throughout the ship. And then the Laffey did something the Japanese did not expect. Uncommanded, without steering control, engulfed in flames, the destroyer turned directly toward the Japanese destroyer Akatsuki and fired torpedoes at less than 300 yards. One of the torpedoes hit. The Akatsuki exploded in a fireball and sank in minutes. But the Laffey's fight had ended. At 2 a.m., just 12 minutes after the battle began, the ship was dead in the water, engulfed in flames, with over 60% of the crew dead or wounded. The order to abandon ship was given. While the survivors jumped into the dark, cold water, the Laffey continued to burn, a torch in the middle of the chaos. What the Laffey had initiated turned into one of the most chaotic and brutal naval engagements of World War II. The two forces were so intermingled that Japanese ships were accidentally firing on their own allies, and the Americans could not distinguish enemy targets from friends. The American cruiser USS Atlanta was hit by Japanese torpedoes and friendly fire simultaneously. Rear Admiral Norman Scott, who was aboard, was killed by shrapnel. The ship drifted, mortally wounded. Minutes later, the Japanese destroyer Udachi, confused in the chaos, sailed directly into the middle of the American cruisers and was ripped apart by fire from multiple ships. Admiral Callahan, aboard the cruiser San Francisco, tried to coordinate the battle by radio, but communications were destroyed. Ships were firing in all directions. The San Francisco traded shots with the Hai at less than 2,000 yards, both ships absorbing devastating punishment. And then came the tragedy that would shift the battle's command. A salvo from the Hai hit the San Francisco's bridge directly. Admiral Callahan was killed instantly, along with most of his staff. The American force was now without centralized command, each ship fighting on its own. But the Japanese were also in disarray. The Hai, despite its size and firepower, had been hit by over 50 shells. Its steering was damaged, its fire control systems destroyed, and Admiral Abe was traumatized by the Laffey's attack and the ensuing chaos. He began to question the mission. At 2:26 a.m., less than 40 minutes after the battle began, the Japanese began to withdraw. The mortally wounded Hai was circling, unable to control its direction. The Kurashima and the remaining destroyers covered its retreat, but the mission to bombard Henderson Field had been abandoned. The battlefield was littered with wreckage and burning ships. The American destroyer Cushing was sinking. The Laffey had already disappeared beneath the waves. The Monson was being abandoned. The Atlanta was mortally wounded. Over 1,400 American sailors had been killed or wounded. But the Japanese also suffered heavily. The Akatsuki was sunk. The Udachi was being abandoned. The Hai, though still afloat, was doomed. And most importantly, the mission had failed. Henderson Field would remain operational. At dawn on November 13, American planes took off from Henderson Field, the field that should have been destroyed, and found the High trying to escape. The great battlecruiser, which only hours before seemed invincible, was sluggish and defenseless. Waves of dive bombers and torpedo planes attacked it repeatedly. By 6 p.m. that evening, the High was a smoking ruin. Its lower compartments flooded, its guns silenced, its deck covered with dead and wounded. Admiral Abe gave the order to scuttle the ship. The High, the pride of the Imperial Navy, sank in the waters of Guadalcanal, the first Japanese battlecruiser lost in the war. The naval battle of Guadalcanal did not end that night. Over the next 2 days, more naval engagements occurred, including a second night battle on November 14th to 15th. But the outcome of the first night had already set the tone. The Japanese never managed to properly bombard Henderson Field. The Japanese transport convoy with 13,000 troops, which was supposed to land after the bombardment, was forced to continue without adequate cover. On the morning of November 14th, planes from Henderson Field found the transports and destroyed them one by one. Only 4,000 Japanese troops managed to reach the beach, most without equipment or supplies. Rear Admiral Abe was relieved of command and sent back to Japan in disgrace. His fleet had been defeated by an inferior force, and he had lost a battlecruiser, a type of ship Japan could not easily replace. The failure was attributed to his hesitation and the tactical disarray that allowed American ships to close the distance. But the reality was more complex. What defeated Abe was not just hesitation, but the suicidal audacity of commanders like William Hank of the Laffey, who turned an impossible battle into a naval street fight where courage mattered more than tonnage. The Laffey had bought enough time for the rest of the American force to enter the fray. Of the 247 men aboard the Laffey, only 85 survived. Many were rescued from the dark waters of Guadalcanal by American destroyers hours after the battle. Commander Hank was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross, the second highest U.S. military decoration. The Laffey was officially removed from the Naval Register in December 1942. But its name was not forgotten. In 1943, a new Allen M. Summer-class destroyer was named USS Laffey, DD-724, in honor of the lost ship. Ironic as it may be, this second Laffey would also become famous, surviving one of the most intense kamikaze attacks of the war in 1945. The naval battle of Guadalcanal was a turning point. For the first time, an American force had decisively defeated the elite of the Imperial Japanese Navy in a night surface engagement, something the Japanese considered their absolute domain. The myth of Japanese invincibility in night battles was shattered. More importantly, the battle ensured that Henderson Field remained operational, meaning the Japanese could no longer freely reinforce or resupply their troops on Guadalcanal. From that point on, the Guadalcanal campaign was a matter of time. The Japanese would evacuate the island in February 1943. And it all began with a tin can that refused to turn back. The story of the USS Laffey in the naval battle of Guadalcanal is a reminder that in war, especially naval warfare, numbers do not always determine the outcome. Courage, audacity, and a willingness to pay the ultimate price can change battles that seem lost before they even begin. When Admiral Abe saw that small destroyer steaming directly toward his massive force, he did not imagine he was seeing the precursor to his defeat. He thought he was watching a suicide. And in a way, he was. But it was a suicide with purpose, to buy time, create chaos, and give the other American ships a chance to fight. The Laffey fought for only 12 minutes before being destroyed. But in those 12 minutes, it critically damaged a battlecruiser, sank a destroyer, stunned the Japanese command, and turned a planned ambush into a naval street fight where no one had a clear advantage. The Japanese laughed when they saw the tin can coming toward them. 10 minutes later, 2 of their ships were sinking, a third was burning and fleeing for its life, and their entire mission had been compromised. And all because a 1,630-ton destroyer refused to recognize that it was defeated. This is the story of the USS Laffey. A ship everyone underestimated, and one that changed the course of a battle, a campaign, and perhaps the war in the Pacific. A tin can that proved courage can defeat tonnage.